Welcome to Leadership Beyond Burnout, the show that's here to help you and your teams heal, lead, and succeed. I'm your host today, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson, your guide on this journey to resilience, growth, and transformation. Now, together we'll dive into stories, strategies, and insights that not only inspire, but empower real change in the way you work and connect. Now, whether it's fresh ideas for resilience or practical steps to create balance and joy, each episode is packed with tools to elevate your workplace and your life. Now, to all our new listeners, I'd like to say welcome. And to our fired up friends returning week after week, we are thrilled to have you back. Please feel free to engage with us during the show, send in questions, and don't hesitate to connect with us anytime at drkimberlywilson.com. Let's share with you our sponsors. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Leadership and Resilience Consultants, who's dedicated to building healthy workplace cultures and equipping women with the tools to overcome and prevent burnout. We have a special guest today. Her name is Cristina Ordonez. She is a stress, resilience, and leadership coach. After 11 years in mergers and acquisitions consulting, Cristina walked away from the partner track to heal her stress and migraines. Now she shows leaders that turning it off is the secret weapon to advancing their career. While using scientifically backed presence practices, yoga philosophy, energy leadership, and International Coaching Federation coaching expertise, Cristina shows clients how to have the life and work they desire without stress. And without further ado, let's introduce Cristina.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here. It's a Saturday morning, and I'd love for you to share exactly how you bring healing to the world.
Well, thank you for having me. And I bring healing to the world by really working with leaders. And one of my missions is to eradicate corporate hustle culture and really start to get to the root cause of our stress and our work addiction in America, and start to realize that there are other ways to be high performers at work, bringing our whole authentic selves. And with that, we create high performing teams that lead to more profitability for our businesses.
I love that you said work addiction. Because when you begin to travel internationally, no one understands like what is our obsession with work. I'd like you to give us a little working definition for those who don't know the difference between what you define as healthy work practices to addictive work practices.
Yeah, I mean, you gave such a great example. You go to Europe and they are an 8-hour a day worker. And I've worked in Europe, and it's these are the hours we're on, we're off. There's a little bit more of this idea of I work to live, and they spend their time with their families. They take lunch breaks, etc. Versus I would call work addiction a lot of what America has, which is they're unable to step away from work. But even more than that, they come home from work and they're quote unquote off, but they're not, right? They're thinking about work. They have the to-do list in their mind. They're still answering Slack. Sometimes they put their kids to bed and come right back to work to get those extra things done. I was in the consulting industry. It was very common that people work Sunday nights to get ahead. And it's this idea of you have to be on at all times to create success, that your visibility is equivalent to your productivity. And so I think it keeps people addicted to being on at all times and available to answering Slacks, answering emails, solving problems. And it's particularly an issue because we live in a global economy. So people are emailing you from India and China, and it's 2 a.m. and many of my clients are waking up. The first thing they do is check their phone in the middle of the night and are starting to panic and answer their emails or their Slacks. And that's an addiction. That is literally not being able to take a step away and say, hey, this is just a part of my life, not my entire life.
Right. The phrase that visibility equals productivity, that when you said that, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I actually visualize that. And it's really curious, how does someone get out of not being visible and being productive when their leader or their manager expects that? And it's highly noticeable if others aren't doing that.
Yeah, and I mean, visible productivity goes back to like the assembly lines, right? It was our way of measuring productivity, and it works really well in manufacturing. But as we get into these other types of jobs, like in technology and the more higher level jobs, your productivity is actually not defined by your ability to answer Slacks or emails. Your productivity is defined by your ability to motivate teams, by your ability to strategically think, by your ability to bring creative decision making. All of those things are actually hindered by how much we are available via Slack and email. And so what I try to tell my clients is that, one, get them really comfortable with what is your value proposition? Where are you bringing a lot of value to the organization? And how do we make that known consistently, not just to yourself, which is really critical, but also to your superiors and to your team? Two, where can you start to just explain to your boss and have a conversation with them around, here's the boundaries I'm going to start to put. I love to implement calendar blocking. I call it offensive and defensive time. And I think offensive time is when you're really in your leadership skills. You're doing the projects only you can do. You're being really strategic. You're really pushing the needle forward towards driving either revenue or cost reduction. And then you have defensive time, which is where you're in meetings, you're answering your team's questions, you're kind of in your response mode. I encourage people to schedule their day that way because it gives them the flexibility to own their schedule. And once they own their schedule, they're actually bringing in higher productivity. And I found they have better results.
Now, the language offensive and defensive time, was that intentional with the word team to kind of get them in that we're collaborative and all working together, or how did you develop that?
And no, it wasn't even that. It's just this idea that, when you have, it's actually alone. The offensive time is actually your alone time. It's every leader gets trapped in this need to be available for the team. And what happens is then they have no time for themselves and they have no time to do the work that only they can do. Right. So what I've noticed is that they'll do it at 8:00 at night. Well, unless you're one of those people that at nighttime is your strategic thinking time, you're really kind of like giving the most important work the least level of your attention because you're already exhausted from the day. So what I say is, like, if you're a morning person or an afternoon person, that's when you schedule your offensive time. It's let's call it a 2-hour block where you are focused on things that only you can do. That could be, how do you delegate tasks? That could be, what's the strategic decision making that has to happen? What's a creative solution I need to bring to my client? The things that only you can do. And I call it offensive because that's what's actually pushing the needle forward. That's what's driving the revenue. That's what's driving the objectives of your role. And then defensive time is where you're managing everything else. You're now on the response. So rather than being the one pushing forward, you become the one responding. And that's when you say, hey team, I'm here. Slack's back on. I'm ready to be available. Let's have, what questions can I answer for you? And I find when you do that time block, you're more fully present for both activities.
Please cut this out, Miriam. I'm stumbling over my words. I love pre-recording. Love doing that. So if someone is watching this right now and they're like, oh my goodness, this is revolutionary. This will change how I live and work. I want to implement some of these strategies. But maybe those in leadership above them don't understand that yet. How do they advocate for themselves to begin to do some of these principles and practices if maybe they don't have the autonomy to just make the change?
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, one, I would question what's going on with leadership if they are pushing back on some of this, because, we see that 1 in 5 employees think that they are working in a toxic work environment, and those types of leadership not being flexible would be a prime example of some toxicity in the work environment. But for hypothetical reasons, if that's happening, and I know for most of my clients that's not been the case, it's just about really defining the value prop. How are, what is the benefit that they get when you start to implement some of these policies? What's the teaming that they get? And then it can also be, if they're a little hesitant, it can be, okay, let's do a trial and let's check in for a month. Like, let's check in on month 1, let's check in on month 2. If you're, what advice would you give me, leader? What do you do? I mean, most of the people I work with are director, senior director, finding their way to VP. And the biggest jump between director, senior director, and VP is that they have to give up a lot of their work. So I find my clients have their hands in a lot of things and they're struggling to give it up. And it's like, this is where I say you accelerate your career by letting go, because to be a VP, you have so much work, you can't touch it anymore, or you can touch very, very little of it. And so it's, in many ways, you can even frame it as, hey, I'm trying to level up my skill set, and this is a way I'm looking to do that. And then, ask for their advice. What did they do to get there, and how can they help? But I found that most of my clients, their block has not been external support. It has been internal confidence to ask for that and feel like they're worthy of asking for the time off, or feel like, changing this belief that I must be on to be successful. That has been the bigger blocker than anything external.
Right. So changing their mindset about what success looks like. And if it's not hard, if it's not difficult, if I don't have my nose to the grindstone, I can't possibly be effective.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, a lot, we were taught, I grew up in corporate hustle culture. We were taught to grind. And once you grind, you're going to get those rewards. And, now you're 15 years into your career, you've ground so much. And it's like, that's amazing. You got here. And that grinding did a really great job of getting you there and getting you all these skill sets at a faster pace. But what got you here isn't going to get you to that next level. And it's all about, when you get higher and higher in the organization, it's less about what you do and it's more about who you are and how you influence. Yes. And that's a completely different skill set. And so it's helping to get them comfortable with this idea of, hey, you don't have to do all the time to be successful, one. And then two, who are you that makes you successful without all those things that you do? Because what are those characteristics? What are those leadership qualities you already have? And then having them own and love their own worth has been really one of the more groundbreaking ways that they've been able to step into their own leadership and then step into their own boundaries. They said, oh, I've tried for years to create boundaries. I could never actually follow my own. And then once we start to say, oh, here's where your worth is, here's where your value prop is, and they gain real confidence in knowing in that, all of a sudden it's a lot easier to step away at night.
So it's more looking at how those competencies in the value proposition rather than the task. I always think when people get hired or they get into another position, you always see all the tasks, but you never. It's rare. I think I've only seen it once where it says these are the higher level competencies that we expect. So it would be difficult to shift your thinking, like, what do I bring to the table?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we're such a doer driven culture. It's all about, what have you done? Hey, what's one of the first questions we ask when we talk to people? It's, what do you do for work? We are so defined by our jobs. And so for many of us, myself included, until I went on my own journey, my job was basically my whole identity. And so this idea of failing at my job was like, I was going to be failing as a person. And that's something I don't think, we talked about addiction. That's part of what keeps people on it all the time, because they're so self-identified with their jobs. I mean, most of my clients are mothers and senior directors, VPs. And it's like, that's all they have. Those are their two identity points. And so it's tough when that happens. And then you have to kind of take a step back and say, the job is always going to really focus on the do. Who's the who that gets it done? Who's the person? What's that type of personality? What are your unique strengths that got you here that have nothing to do with all the deliverables that you produced, but yet are things like you're a good listener, you bring new perspectives, people really trust you, you have high empathy, teams tend to perform well for you, you're a good trainer. All of those things are what make high performing teams, and they also make you a better leader, and they have nothing to do with what you produced.
Mm-hmm. So I know that a lot of high performing professionals, they struggle with when to step back and how to step back. What are some practical steps and presence practices that you think that leaders can start using today to help them build resilience and prevent burnout?
Yeah, I mean, look, I will say that there's, these practices are amazing in helping you to start to get to a neutral place. But so often it's more work that's required to actually get you away from burnout. Burnout can be, your values don't align. Burnout could be your identity is too wrapped up in work. Burnout could be you don't have an understanding of your value proposition. There's so many reasons that lead to burnout beyond this. But I love these idea of quick, fast presence practices because I worked in an environment where every minute was precious, and taking an hour lunch break was just I couldn't even comprehend it. And so I love this idea of what are ways I can relieve stress in 5 minutes or less, something you can do in between meetings when you're going back to back to back. And so one of the things I didn't realize when I was dealing with a lot of stress is that stress isn't a mental aspect. It's actually a physiological aspect. So it's occurring in your body. When you're under stress, your body is naturally going into a fight or flight. Your heart rate's picking up, your breath is shallowing, your blood's coming to the center of your body. And even if that stressor goes away, your body is still in fight or flight. And so when we know that it's physical, one of the biggest aha moments for me was, okay, so to release it, you have to release it physically. My personal favorite is always breath work because I can do it anywhere and it's very simple. I like to do a box breath, 4 count inhale, 4 count hold, 4 count exhale, 4 count hold. Let's call it 5 to 10 breaths. One of my other favorites is like a 2-minute dance party, put on a song and just jump around. It's that idea of moving the energy through your body. And then another one that most people don't realize is giving somebody a hug. A 30-second hug gives you enough time to regulate your heartbeat with theirs, and it naturally releases oxytocin and helps you to settle. If you don't have somebody around, you can hug yourself, and self-touch is known to be just as effective. So these are things that you can do in 2 minutes or less, that there's really no excuse for not doing it, because I think for so many people, it's like, well, I don't have 15 minutes to meditate. Okay, that's great. Do you have 2 minutes to just give yourself a little breather? And I always tell my clients the most important thing to do outside of doing these practices is to take a moment after they're done and notice what's shifted in your body, what's shifted in your mind, like what feels different, because what's rewarded is repeated. So if we just do the practice and go right back into work, we're never going to actually see the effects or understand the effects that we're feeling. So it's okay. Do this for 2 minutes, take 30 seconds and say, oh, my shoulders feel more relaxed. I feel a little bit happier. I feel lighter. And then it helps to reinforce doing this over and over again, because you're really kind of changing daily habits in your life.
Absolutely. So do you have some other daily habits that you do personally that are longer when you're outside of the working environment to just kind of build your resilience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a yoga teacher, so I teach yoga, I take yoga. Yoga is a big part of my life and my resilience practices, particularly yoga philosophy, has really changed my life and how I think about approaching my life. So pretty much a daily yoga practice, daily meditation practice, daily journal practice. And I'm constantly reading something that is of whether coaching, leadership, or yoga philosophy as means of continuing to keep myself up and going. I do the small practices even in between. One of my favorite things to do is I call it a 10-minute gratitude walk, and I'll go outside and I'll say things I'm thankful for. And I'll start with the easy ones, friends, family, things in my life. And then it's like, well, what about me brought all this to my life? And then I start getting to these different perspectives. And so that's one of my favorites to do when I'm in busy day of calls and I don't have a lot of time to get outside. I used to say, well, I need 30 minutes to go for a walk. Now I say, I'll just walk around my building for 10 minutes, quick sun on the face and let it be.
Right. People forget how healing nature can be. Just a quick moment to touch, to feel, the smell, to hear nature can change your whole perspective, mindset, and just create a sense of well-being over you.
Yeah, well, we are animals first and foremost, right? So it makes perfect sense that being in nature would be healing to us, just like it is all of our brethrens.
Mhm. It almost feels like you've constructed work that heals your former self.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of my work is inspired by my own personal journey. I started in mergers and acquisitions right out of college. I was determined to work my way up and eventually become CFO of a mid-sized to large company. That was my ultimate goal. And laser focused since I was a teenager. That's what I was going to do. And I started getting really bad headaches pretty early into my career, probably about 3 years in. And I kept climbing, and I found the higher I climbed, the sicker I got. And it was to the point where I was checking myself into the hospital in between projects. I was having to step back on projects, and I just could not get healthy. And I remember my last year, I hired a coach and said, look, I love my job and I want to keep my job, but I have to figure something out because this isn't working anymore, being sick every single day of my life. And about 9 months later, I realized, hey, this job, I love this job and it's nothing to do with the company, but this environment, I'm never going to heal in this environment and I need to take a step away. And that's really what started my own healing journey of like, what is stress and why am I so impacted by it? And what, it's not that I'd meditated forever and I had done all these other things and nothing seemed to help. And so it was really what started my journey was just pure self-discovery and saying, what is it that keeps me so stressed? And what is it that, it's not anybody else but me. The stress is self-imposed. And how do I start to really heal that? And through yoga and through coaching, I really learned a lot about what my own stress was. And then through reading and really investigating stress, I started to say, oh my God, it's in your body. What am I doing here? And how am I figuring this out? And that's how I started to heal my own self. And then over time, I started to say, I bet you there's more people that feel this way. And I'm actually surprised at how many people struggle with this. It's really, whether it's you call it burnout or you just call it stress, so many people are dealing with being unable to turn off their brains. They have no concept or attachment to their bodies, and it's keeping them in these loops of misery. And I'm here to help them get out of it.
Right. Stress absolutely is an inside job. I want to go back because you said something really intriguing to me when you said you were laser focused on mergers and acquisitions since you were a teen. And I just need to figure out how did that become something that you were interested in as a teen? Because usually there's I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, so how did you discover mergers and acquisitions as a teenager?
Well, yeah, my dad was a pretty high up executive in an automotive company. He had done, like, through his own work, had divestitures and acquisitions. So I was familiar with them. My ultimate goal was to be a CFO, but I went through the mergers and acquisitions route because I knew that it was a really prestigious field and it was really fast paced and you got to see a lot more action by doing mergers and acquisitions. So that was really my ultimate reason for going in there was, hey, I'm going to see a lot. I'm going to see major transformation, support major transformation. And it will only help me to become a better leader in understanding really, when you do mergers and acquisitions, there's so much complexity in the financial layout. There's so much complexity in the operational layout, but there's so much complexity in the cultural layout and the change management of bringing two companies together who, of redoing the organization, of finding the right leaders. And so I was right to bring interest into that because the level of exposure I got right away and the amount of leadership skills I developed from being in mergers and acquisitions was amazing. It was a lot.
I can only imagine. It sounds very high paced, and I've been on the receiving end of experiencing that. Some very good, well planned mergers and acquisitions, and those that were not so well planned in terms of the disruption to the culture and how
Yep.
to blend those cultures together. And they were often laced with a lot of fear and not great leadership. But so,
Yeah. It's very common, and it's probably the number one reason mergers fail is the cultural cohesion is often underestimated. I think it's becoming more and more frequently addressed now, but it's commonly underestimated, and you kind of look at it more operationally. And look, there's going to be fear because in every deal there's a cost cutting component. And that's really the only component that they have control over. They don't have control over the revenue component. So there's a cost cutting component, which means people are going to be laid off. And so it's completely natural that there's fear. And you have to be willing to sit with that fear and be with that fear while also starting to say who's going to bring together cohesion and know that, we're doing this for a greater good.
what would be some of the things that would encourage? Because I feel like we're in a really highly stressful time right now in the United States, and what would be something that you would encourage people to do to not take on other people's stress? Because I know I've faced that lately. It's like, ah, not right now. I don't need your stress.
Interesting. I think I would one of the things I think about with boundaries is how do I show up in love? And I think about that too. When you're taking on other people's stress, who are you doing it for? Are you doing it for them? Are you doing it for yourself? Because it in reality isn't serving either of you. And it's important to remember that, I'm right now in hurricane recovery. We had two massive hurricanes over the last month, and I took my time to grieve a bit, but my house is safe, my family's safe, and so there was some luck there. And I realized pretty quickly that it's okay to have some grieving time, but me being in the sadness and the stress of what's going around in my environment keeps me from being in service to my community and my environment. And so I gave myself a little time, and then I said, okay, I'm okay. How can I now show up for them? Because if I keep showing up, taking on their stress and their heaviness, I can't show up in a place of light and support for them. And that's like one of the things that we forget when we take on other people's stress. We think we're sharing the burden, but in reality, we're not helping anyone. The best way to help people is to raise your own energy so that they can see, they can raise the energy. If you are a higher vibration, they can come up to you rather than you dropping down to them.
So you're saying that it's quite detrimental for them to join in the misery.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, if you're in the misery too, like you can't find creative solutions to help them. How can you be in service to them if you're feeling it like a victim? You can't, So and it doesn't mean that you don't have your own stressors that you need to deal with, but if you can deal with those and then realize that you can be in higher service to them by moving beyond it, they are victims, let them be in that victim, but then also be in service.
Right. I also believe that it takes some really understanding who you are. And that's one of the reasons, like when I was really heavily into doing therapy, I never took on trauma clients because I know that when they were talking, I discovered that pretty quickly that I could feel it, and
Yeah.
I'm experiencing everything that they're talking about, and I'm like, I'm not going to do this type of work. This needs to be somebody else because if I'm a mess, I can't support you. I think I broke down when a young girl was telling me about her abuse situations, and that's when I discovered that.
Yeah.
Um, can you hear a dog barking right now, or is
Okay. It's okay.
it's not good for the recording? Okay, I'm trying to see if he's gonna stop. Let me pause it. Jesus.
No worries. I was like, I hear
Oh,
this dog. I'm not going
Zoom. Okay, Christina, I'd love to hear how your background, you combine these scientific methods, yoga philosophy, and energy leadership. How do you integrate these to help leaders manage stress and align with their long-term career goals?
Yeah. So, I like to do a multi-prong approach. So the scientifically backed presence practices, some of which we talked about earlier, those are your quick fixes. Those are some stuff that I have them implement almost immediately to start to just ease their day to day. They're easy to implement. It's something I say, do it once a day, 2 minutes, nothing to overwhelm. So those are always a really nice place to start. And this is something that really anyone can do at any time. And then when we go into the sessions, it's really where we're focusing on energy leadership and yoga practices and yoga philosophy. And like I said before, one of the biggest elements that I find that keep my clients trapped in work is worthiness. Thinking
Mm,
that every day they have to prove their worth over and over and over again. The score sheet resets. It's a new day. I must prove all over again that I'm worthy. And helping to change that narrative in their head, that need to be proving all the time is exhausting. And it's no wonder that it keeps them stressed out and it keeps them worried that their next mistake is their last mistake. And
right.
so we really dive into what makes you worthy? How can you hold worthiness for yourself? What is it about you that's so unique that makes you great on the job, but also makes you great as a human being? And then I love to, as I mentioned earlier too, so often we are defined so much by our jobs. It's, when I was working, my husband used to say it all the time, but he was right. He's like, you don't have a hobby. You don't have anything else outside of this job. Your job is your whole life. And I think it's so important that we have things outside of our jobs that define us, whether it be workout classes that we go to an art class, and it doesn't have to be this huge thing we do every day, but once a week, once every 2 weeks, something that defines us, that is just for the simple pleasure of it. Like, you don't have to be good at it. It can just be something you're interested in. It could be baking, it could be acting, whatever it may be. And so I really encourage them to find things outside of work to start to reconnect with those parts of themselves that they're using in work, but they're thinking about it as they have to prove themselves over and over again. And when they start to play with it outside of work, they start to realize, oh, this is just who I am. And I get to
Mm,
be loving of who I am. Um, and then finally, I love to do celebrations. So often we focus on, I call it, our inner critics are strong. Mine, I call constructive Cristina, because she was not overtly mean, but she was always saying, well, that we could improve here and we could do this next and we could do this. And
mhm,
it was a subtle way of tearing myself down and saying I was never enough for what I did. And so a big
right.
part of my practice is, what are we celebrating today? And not just what are we celebrating that happened good in your life, but what about you made that thing happen, so that they're tying it back to how they are actually creating the reality around them. And that
Mm,
is, with that, the energy leadership is all about, perceptions of how you view the world. And so by helping them to shift their perception of themselves, they're shifting the perception of how they're impacting the world, and thus shifting their perception of the world. And so that's kind of how I love to use them. And then the yoga part is just remembering, so many of us who have the stress and control are very tightly combined. Most
mhm,
people are stressed and they look to control to heal the stress. They
yeah.
look to doing to heal the stress. Well, if I do this, then this will happen. That's a fallacy. We don't have any control in life. And that's one of the biggest lessons that yoga taught me, is that, you have very little control in what happens in life. You don't control the outcome of most things. In fact, you think about it, so often we're in partnership with other people. We don't control their decisions. We don't control what they ultimately want to do. And so
Right.
all you can do is be in the moment and say, am I enjoying the process? Am I loving this process just for what it is, for what I'm getting out of it right here, right now? And then letting go of, if I do this, it will mean that, because that's just your mind keeping you trapped in a prison of what if scenarios and trying to manipulate things that you really have no ability to impact. And that's been, for me, one of the most life-changing lessons of learning. And I hope for my clients too, that they learn that when they let go, actually things come a lot easier and gifts become more abundant. And all of a sudden things start to flow. You know, so many people say, I want to get into flow state. Well, one of the number one ways to get into flow state is learning how to let go, learning that you don't control everything and to just focus on what you think you can, you know, what you think is best to do in the moment, and releasing expectation that it means anything about what you'll do, about what will happen in the end.
Mm. And that seems so counterintuitive. That seems so counterintuitive to the whole American work ethic. And so that would create a shift, a definite shift. How challenging have you found it for leaders to begin to adopt some of these practices? Does that take a while to have that mindset shift?
It does. It does. I mean, and I always joke with them, like, if I could figure out how to do this in a session, I'd be a multimillionaire, because ooh wee. But it takes, it takes some belief. It takes mindset shifting, but it also takes evidence to help them to really start to believe it. And that's why I have longer containers, because in that container, we'll have moments where they'll let go and then something will happen and they'll go, oh my God, it worked. And then once they start to see it working, whether it be in a small way or a big way, they start to buy into it more and more. So we start with, if you feel worthy, if you feel like you're enough, if you feel like you don't have to constantly prove yourself, then you're able to say, maybe I trust myself enough to try this. Mm-hmm. And so then this trying is, hey, let me let go of, I don't control this RFP. I don't control if they're going to say yes or no, which is true. You don't. Like, all you can do is show up as best as you can in presenting it and think, and, put your best foot forward. And so let's focus on that. It's not about, and I think this is the thing with letting go that people struggle with, is it's not about being in inaction. Inaction is not the point. The point is to be in action, but just be in presence of that action. Not worried about the result, just simply saying, I am here, I am doing this process, and I am loving this process in this moment, and trusting that the results are going to work themselves out however they're meant to work out. Mm-hmm. And so, it takes time, but the evidence starts to stack itself, and all of a sudden they go, wow, life's getting so much easier. My stress all of a sudden isn't so hard. And I work with some clients that aren't even coming to me for stress, and then they're like, wow, I'm just such a better teammate now at work because I'm not so obsessed with everything they're doing. I'm not trying to micromanage. I'm just letting them go. And they're just naturally rising to the occasion. Wow, I had no idea this would happen. And so, it is pretty magical to watch not just their stress go down, but their team's leadership rise. And this is where I say, like, this is not just about them as an individual. This is about them as a leader. And almost in every single client I've had, their team's performance has increased after we've worked together.
So there's an exponential impact when they are brave enough to begin to adopt some of these practices and take on a observational role and say, okay, how is this impacting me? How is this impacting others? And not just, oh my goodness, I'm not doing it the way I've always done it. When is the sky gonna fall?
And sometimes it's like that for a couple weeks, and then the sky doesn't fall, and they go, oh, okay, like there's another way. And isn't that how it works, right? Like, we do what we know until we can't do it anymore. And that was why I had to walk away from my job. And I'm trying to help people so that they don't have to walk away and let it all go. There's different ways to be successful. And for me, one of the biggest ones is learning to let go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes I believe there's a fear that if we bring somebody in, will they make all our people want to leave? Because well, they feel like the workplace just can't shift. It can't be any different. Um, when you were talking about the performance practices, I don't know why I keep going back to teams. Maybe because you mentioned offensive and defensive in the beginning, and I'm thinking, oh, would this work for something like a football team? Where when you talk about proving their worthiness all the time and then not performing, do you think it would work for an actual sports team?
Yeah, I mean, it's the way we do one thing is the way we do everything. So whether it be you're doing this in work or you're doing this in sport, it's going to work the same. And honestly, if you look at it, sports psychology is one of the best places to actually look at some of the practices I'm implementing and say it's truly successful. Who are the best at, look at Roger Federer. He just did a commencement speech and he said one of his best, one of his differentiators was his ability to stay present. Lost that point. It's gone. I'm right back here. Most people in sports have to have a high degree of worthiness in themselves and trust that they, trust their abilities. They have to have high degree of presence and they have to have a memory of a goldfish because they're going to lose points. They're gonna, not everything is going to be won. I think Roger Federer said he only won 51% or 52% of his sets, but that was enough. And, most of sports is a mental game. Most of corporate life is a mental game. And so truthfully, yeah, you can apply it to teams, but I would say it's more the inverse, that I've found the sports psychology has given us more evidence of this than what we see in corporate, because it's a lot more measured there. And that's why so many teams have sports psychologists.
Okay, then. Thank you very much. That's wonderful. So, are there any other things that you do outside just to build your creativity outside of yoga and
Yeah, I mean, yoga is such a big part of my creativity. So I love creating new flows every week. Like I'm always trying to be experimenting with different transitions. So I love this idea of that I get to play with my body all the time. I was a figure skater growing up. So I have always loved this element of using my body and expressing it. I get to create playlists every week and that's a part of it. And then I do messages every single week for yoga and gets to kind of bring that philosophy as a rounding of the experience. So for me, yoga is like probably my number one creative outlet because it is 100% for me. It's, it's kind of selfish. Like I just do whatever I feel like and hopefully people like it, but it's just my own expression and my own ability. And that is definitely my number one creative outlet. In terms of other things that I do for outlets, I love to read. I'm on book number 75 of the year. So,
okay.
So I'm a big avid reader. I don't watch a lot of TV. I'm not on socials except for when I'm posting. So I love getting lost in other worlds. I'm a big fantasy reader. I love magic and witches and just this idea of, we could create a spell and everything could just turn around. That's amazing to me. So those are kind of my big outlets.
Now, is it a book or is it a Kindle book? Like
it's both. I read a lot in Kindle because it's just easier. And I also have Kindle Unlimited because I was spending way too much money on all these books. But I do have physical books too. So I'm normally reading about 2 to 3 books at any given time at once. And so typically 1 to 2 of them are a real book and at least one of them's in the Kindle.
Okay. I probably need to take some lessons from you because I think I have maybe about just as many books half read that I haven't gone back to. It's because I keep buying them and not half reading them. So that's a really bad habit I need to get rid of.
Oh no, it's okay. Maybe you're not meant to finish them and you'll pick them up and finish them when you're ready,
But that's what I tell myself, that one day I'm gonna finish.
Depending on what you're reading, some of them you kind of get the gist in the beginning. and you, you can kind of figure it out from there.
Yes, yes, you can figure it out. Or if I started and I fall asleep, it's like, oh, this probably isn't the book for me. It's not
Yeah,
holding my
exactly.
attention, time and attention. You've shared so many wonderful nuggets for us during this time, and I'd love to be able to offer you the opportunity to issue a challenge to our viewers for either themselves personally and or their workplace if they are in a position where they can make some changes. What challenge would you like to issue?
I would like to issue a celebration challenge. We are so quick to focus on where to improve and not quick enough to recognize and celebrate all that got us to where we are today. So, celebration challenge is for yourself, finding something you want to celebrate in yourself, but then also for those leaders of teams, each individual person on your team during your next one-on-one with them, can you celebrate them for something that they've positively impacted the team with? And just notice how it shifts. People, we underestimate the power of positive feedback and consistent positive feedback. That's not just during a performance review. It's nice to be celebrated. And if we continue to celebrate and raise positivity, it's just going to lead to greater performance.
I love that. Thank you so very much. And we'll put in the comments section how everyone can get in touch with you. Any last words before you go?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And it was really wonderful. And I guess my last words are just, hey, know your worth. You're so worthy of being on this planet and you have something really special to give. And remember that the more you tie to your authentic true self, the more we all get to benefit from the magic that you are.
Thank you so very much, Cristina.
You're welcome.
Everyone, you've been watching Leadership Beyond Burnout. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson. You can see us here every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 2 p.m. Pacific. Until then, we will see you next time.